Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this important event of the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. Your Excellency, the High Commissioner for Canada, members of the Board of Management and the Academic Board of Studies who are present with us today, the Director, Dr. Minna Tahir, and the staff of the the BCIS, the Director of the BMICH. I would first like to congratulate all our students who are at the convocation and receiving their diplomas for the higher diplomas and also the postgraduate diplomas today. I would also like to thank the members of the Board of Management and the Academic Board of Studies for their immense contribution to the development and advancement of the BCIS in the past few years. I would also like to specially appreciate the director and staff of the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies for their efforts to keep up with the difficult challenges of these pandemic times while implementing new programs for the development of the BCIS. I would like to present some thoughts for the reflection of our diplomates today, reflection and dialogue amongst themselves if they so wish. When you walk out of the BCIS today, well, virtually I suppose, with your diplomas in international relations, you will become the advocates of the value of international relations and a good and effective foreign policy for Sri Lanka. You have gained a basic knowledge of the subject of international relations, a vast and ever-changing subject of immense interest to the entire world, particularly to each state and nation that comprises our world today. I shall now speak of one specific area of international relations, the foreign policy of states and governments. Foreign policy is the vision and the policy that sets out the parameters of and the manner in which a country engages with the rest of the world. Since millennia, when Homo sapiens advanced from the primitive era towards civilized society and later to modern socio-economic and cultural organization, states have maintained relations and exchanges with other states. The foreign policy of any country is usually focused on the vision its leaders and peoples have of who they are, their national identity, in other words, where they stand at a given time in their history, and how they see their future. Socio-economic development and national security are the two major axes of all foreign policy, or they should be. Countries have to ascertain their strengths and weaknesses, their assets, natural as well as human, and what they lack to achieve the objectives they have set themselves. Countries have looked outwards to obtain what they do not possess. The entire concept of colonialism was born out of the desire to plunder and take away the riches required by the colonizing nations. On the other hand, astute leaders, even in the ancient world, especially of the smaller and poorer nations, evolved systems of relations with foreign states in order to obtain their requirements in food and goods mainly for the development of their economies. The ancient Sri Lankan kings understood very clearly the need for such a foreign policy, opening up our ports of entry to traders plying the most important route from east to west, the sea routes, and vice versa, in search of goods. In search of goods. They seem to have understood that Sri Lanka's greatest and most precious asset was our geographically strategic position in the Indian Ocean, right in the middle of the trade routes, from east to west and from west to east. We were colonized for nearly 5 centuries, whilst the massive Indian subcontinent underwent colonization for a little over 1 century. We were colonized for 5 centuries by 3 major powers, not for our elephants and their ivory, not for our precious stones, not our spices, nor the amazing natural beauty of our land, and the warm hospitality and the famous smiling faces of our peoples. We were conquered and ruled by colonial masters, mainly to have control of our strategic position in order to dominate the trade routes and for military control of the region against other competing states. The ancient kings of Lanka were sufficiently astute to understand this well and to realize that the best advantage of a small and not so powerful country like ours was to maintain friendly relations with all nations, negotiating for the best trade deals we could get, while permitting them to access their requirements in diverse types of goods from our land. Historical evidence of diplomatic relations and trade exchanges between the monarchs of Lanka and those of the most developed states of Europe, Arabia, and Persia, as well as Asia, prove the extent of the success of the policy of our ancient kings. They did not abuse foreign powers and stir up xenophobic fears amongst our peoples for cheap popularity. It is no secret that colonization severely muddied the waters of this established state of international relations. The colonial policy of conquest and taking over our country, lock, stock, and barrel, radically changed Lanka's foreign policy. We have now been an independent sovereign state for over 70 years. Even today, more than ever, our foreign policy must be founded on the country's social and economic imperatives and security imperatives. Every government since independence has expressed a vision that would liberate all our peoples from poverty and develop the country to reach accepted standards of socio-cultural and economic advancement. And of course, to guarantee national security. When formulating our foreign policy today, is it not imperative to analyze what riches and assets we possess nationally and what we lack to achieve our objectives? We live in a world with a globalized and open economy, regulated by a massive network of international cooperation through multilateral organizations. In this context, it becomes evident that our national requirements need to be obtained elsewhere by means of foreign investment or aid or credit from the international network. It is at this point that the doors must open to a wise and practical foreign policy. Do we begin to gabble about international conspiracies by foreign states and continue abusing some of our international friends? Or should we operate a policy that would be open and friendly to all nations especially to the ones with whom we share a common world vision, who could be our partners in development and progress. It is also imperative to understand the dynamics of international relations and world politics when deciding our foreign policy. Sri Lanka cannot afford to have friends on one hand and enemies and make enemies on the other. We could even less afford to befriend one or two states whilst antagonizing others. I reiterate over and over again that our major and most essential asset is our strategic position in the Indian Ocean. We must be aware that all big powers desire to have control of our landmass for this strategic position. Hence, we have to formulate our foreign policy, our international relations in function of that knowledge to make full use of our strategic position, of our main asset, of our most important riches, whilst protecting our security and our sovereignty. The world has today moved very far from the era when states battled each other for military control and resources. The immense destruction and havoc wreaked by the various wars waged during the 19th and 20th century, and the horrors of the two world wars convinced the world that civilized man does not need guns and bombs to resolve problems. Skilled diplomatic negotiations and dialogue can go much further than war and violence in resolving differences between states. The birth of international and regional organizations in the 20th century after the Second World War, the United Nations Organization, the European Union, APEC, SAARC, BIMSTED in our region, the African Union, the Alliance of Latin American States, and so on, have created the space and vast possibilities for international cooperation. The established, accepted concept of international relations since the 19th and 20th centuries is the sovereignty of the state, based on the principles of democracy, properly functioning democratic institutions, and the respect for fundamental rights and individual freedoms. The international system operates presently on the principles that all states must respect these concepts. I request our young students or graduates to please remember this. If we are to be considered fully fledged members of the international community and to draw on the advantages and benefits of the global systems and institutions, we have to honor and respect these principles. Hence, if a country is seen to violate the basic norms stipulated by international laws, we know that that nation will be marginalized and even ostracized. So, in short, for an effective economic development of our little island state, we need considerable amounts of foreign investment to advance our levels of production and productivity, to develop our infrastructure, and many other things. We also need loans on easy terms. None of this will be forthcoming in the existing global system if we are considered to have violated the basic international principles and laws. Sri Lanka has experienced strictures several times under certain governments. Secondly, it is imperative that we do not favor one state as against another, We have also experienced the painful outcomes of such policies in the past and even recently. Let us note that Sri Lanka has prospered most during periods when we possessed a wise and perspicacious foreign policy of friendly relations with all. I can cite many examples, but may I cite just a few for the moment. The non-aligned foreign policy of Madam Sirimao Bandaranaike's government successfully maintained foreign relations with all nations, to the extent that we gave the right of access to both warring sides to fly military aircraft over our territory during the Indo-Pakistan War, and still continue to maintain friendly relations with both nations. My government opened up much more than before to the West, while strengthening relations with our powerful neighbor India, as well as Japan, China, and the Far East. Sorry. Statistics will demonstrate the developmental successes we achieved economically, obtaining credit and foreign investment, even while a violent war was raging in the country. All of you, who I hope will become Sri Lanka's diplomats or foreign policy advocates, whichever profession you espouse, must clearly realize the damage we cause nationally by engaging in cheap theatrics of abusing our foreign friends and conjuring up enemies, non-existent enemies, in order to gain short-term advantages of winning votes for one political party or another. It is therefore imperative that Sri Lanka's foreign policy today must contain a few of the major policies that I would like to enunciate briefly. Firstly, be open to the whole world while promoting and developing close relations with the most powerful nations, while never ignoring friendly relations with all our neighboring countries, big or small, as well as nations in other continents with whom we have common interests. Secondly, never accept that our leaders, for whatever personal considerations, become pawns of one state or another, to the detriment of other friendly states, thereby endangering our national security and territorial security. Today we hear of, in that context, some people in important places talking about strategic competition, strategic dilemmas, strategic chaos, strategic convergence. I have studied international relations in one of the world's, well, supposedly best institutes. And I do not know what these mean. To me, they are vacuous statements which do not at all tell us what the foreign policy of the people who mouth these words purport to be. Thirdly, we must understand that even though small and not rich, Sri Lanka has stood tall and proud amongst the world's giants whenever we have acted as a sovereign, independent, and democratic state. To achieve all this, fourthly, we need a well-trained professional foreign service. We cannot think that our foreign service can be an employment agency for the relatives of the rulers or a dumping ground for uneducated acolytes. we once did possess highly respected foreign service officials who were selected for some of the highest posts in international organizations, such as the UN and others. But then, those were the halcyon days of good governance in Sri Lanka. I shall now wind up on that nostalgic note, in the hope that all of you and future graduates of the BCIS would advance yourselves, would learn and become the future skilled professionals of our foreign service and the advocates of foreign policy of Sri Lanka. Thank you once again for giving me your ears, and thank you for being present with us, Your Excellency, the Canadian High Commissioner, and all the others. Thank you.